Hey guys, it's me. It's Miss Checka. I had to race home in order to be here on time, but here I am with Lewis Sacker's holes. So that's pretty exciting, huh? Hold on just a second. Okay. My friends, we are going to dive right in. I'm taking a selfie while I'm live. Is that weird? Okay. All right. First of all, I want to show y'all with my fancy bookmark here that we are more than halfway done with this book. It's Allison and Tess. Okay, that's super exciting. So we're more than halfway done, which, you know, that's exciting. When we left, Mr. Pendanski and Zero kind of had it out. Mr. Pendanski was awful and Zero left. So he is by himself out in the desert. Let's find out what happens. All right. Chapter 31. This is page 141. It's Monse. Hi, Monse. Okay. Chapter 31. Stanley angrily dug his shovel into the dirt. He was angry at everyone. Mr. Pendanski, the Warden, Xxxii, Xxxii, and his no-good, dirty, rotten, pig-stealing great-great-grandfather. But mostly, he was angry at himself. He knew he should never have let Zero dig part of his hole for him. He still could have taught him to read. If Zero could dig all day and still have the strength to learn, then he should have been able to dig all day and still have had the strength to teach. What he should do, he thought, was go after Zero. But he didn't. None of the others helped him dig Zero's hole, and he didn't expect them to. Zero had been digging him dig his hole. Now he had to dig Zero's. All right, it took Stanley a long time to come to this conclusion, but he's right? He shouldn't have, been making Zero or accepting Zero's help with his hole. He should have just taught him how to read, because that's what friends do, right? He remained out on the lake digging during the hottest part of the day, long after everyone else had gone in. He kept an eye out for Zero, but Zero didn't come back. It would have been easy to go out after Zero. There was nobody to stop him. He kept thinking that's what he should do. Maybe they could climb to the top of the Big Thumb. If it wasn't too far away, and if it was really the same place where his great-grandfather found refuge, and if, after 100 years or so, water was still there. It didn't seem likely, not when an entire lake had gone dry. Can I just say, the reason I had to race back is because I was at my school to pass stuff out to kids, including Allison, and it was so hot, and I had my mask, and it fogged up my glasses. I couldn't see. I was super sweaty. So I feel especially sympathetic right now to Zero and Stanley having to be outside in the hot weather, because it is not fun. Okay. And even if they did find refuge on Big Thumb, he thought they'd still have to come back here eventually. Then they'd both have to face the Warden and her rattlesnake fingers. Instead, he came up with a better idea, although he didn't quite have it quite all figured out yet. He thought that maybe he could make a deal with the Warden. He'd tell her where he really found the gold tube if she wouldn't scratch Zero. He wasn't sure how he'd make this deal without getting himself in deeper trouble. She might just say, "Tell me where you found it, or I'll scratch you too." Plus, it would mean Xxxii would get in trouble too. She'd probably scratch him up as well. Xxxii would be out to get him for the next 16 months. He dug his shovel into the dirt. By the next morning, Zero still hadn't returned. Stanley saw one of the counselors sitting guard by the water spigot outside the shower wall. Mr. Pendanski had 2 black eyes and a bandage over his nose. "I always knew he was stupid," Stanley heard him say. Stanley was required to dig only one hole the next day. As he dug, he kept a constant watch out for Zero, but never saw him. Once again, he considered going out on the lake to look for him, but he began to realize it was already too late. His only hope was that Zero had found God's thumb on his own. It wasn't impossible. His great-grandfather had found it. For some reason, his great-grandfather had felt the urge to climb to the top of the mountain. Maybe Zero would feel the same urge. If it was the same mountain, and if water was still there. He tried to convince himself it wasn't impossible. There had been a storm just a few days ago. Maybe Big Thumb was actually some kind of natural water tower that caught and stored the rain. It wasn't impossible. He returned to his tent to find the warden, Mr. Sir, and Mr. Pendanski all waiting for him. "Have you seen Zero?" the warden asked him. "No." "No sign of him at all?" "No." "Do you have any idea where he went?" "No." "You know you're not doing him any favors if you're lying," said Mr. Sir. "He can't survive out there for more than a day or two." "I don't know where he is." All three stared at Stanley as if they were trying to figure out if he was telling the truth. Mr. Pendanski's face was so swollen, he could barely open his eyes. They were just slits. "Are you sure he has no family?" the warden asked Mr. Pendanski. "He's a ward of the state," Mr. Pendanski told her. "He was living on the streets when he was arrested." "Is there anyone who might ask questions? Some social worker who took an interest in him?" "He had nobody," said Mr. Pendanski. "He was nobody." The warden thought a moment. "Okay, I want you to destroy all of his records." Mr. Pendanski nodded. "He was never here," said the warden. Mr. Sir nodded. "Can you get into the state files from our computer?" she asked Mr. Pendanski. "I don't want anyone in the AG's office to know he was here." I don't think I can erase him completely from all the state's files," said Mr. Pendanski. "Too many cross-references. But I can make it so it would be very difficult for anyone to ever find a record of him. Like I said, no one will ever look. No one cares about Hector Zeroni." "Good," said the warden. So let's think about what they're saying, because this is so brutal, right? They lost a kid. That's what happened, is that Hector Zeroni went off and they're responsible for him. I mean, the state put them in charge of all of these kids and they're responsible for them. So if you were at Camp Green Lake and you walked off, imagine what your parents would say if they found out that like you've been digging holes all this time, that a counselor called you dumb and stupid and talked to you the way that Mr. Pendanski did, that you were humiliated publicly and then you walked off and then nobody found you. I know some of y'all parents. I know. That would not go down well. They would go down to that camp, and not only would they would. That's not going to happen, right? Well, that's one motivation that they should go and find the kid, because he needs water. It's dangerous out there. But not only are they going to not look after him and try and find him and try and rescue him, but they're also going to erase any records. Like when they say AG, that's an attorney general. When they say ward of the state, that means that Hector's parents are not around, that they don't have custody of him. Either they've passed away or they've lost custody of him. So basically what they're saying is that if this kid runs away, never comes back, or if he dies, instead of trying to find him or taking responsibility, they are just going to cover it up. So this is really, really, really bad stuff. And they think that they can just get away with it, right? Tess, you know what oh yes, I do. I know your mom real well. She would not stand for that for 1 second. P.S. If any of you guys get sent to Camp Green Lake, you just send me a postcard and I would come get you out. All right, chapter 32. This is page 145. 2 days later, a new kid was assigned to Group D. His name was Brian, but Xxxii called him Twitch because he was always fidgeting. Twitch was assigned to Zero's bed and Zero's crate. Vacancies don't last long at Camp Green Lake. Twitch had been arrested for stealing a car. He claimed he could break into a car, disconnect the alarm, and hotwire the engine all in less than a minute. I never planned to, steal one, he told them. But sometimes, I'll be walking past a real nice car parked in a deserted area, and, I'll just start twitching. If you think I twitch now, you should see me when I'm around a car. The next thing I know, I'm behind the wheel. Stanley lay on his scratchy sheets. It occurred to him that his cot no longer smelled bad. He wondered if the smell had gone away or if he had just gotten used to it. Hey, caveman, said Twitch, do we really have to get up at 4:30? You get used to it, Stanley told him. It's the coolest part of the day. He tried not to think about Zero. It was too late. Either he'd make it to Big Thumb or... What worried him most, however, was that wasn't that it was too late. What worried him the most, what really ate at his inside, was the fear that it wasn't too late. What if Zero was still alive, desperately crawling across the dirt, searching for water? He tried to force the image out of his mind. The next morning, out on the lake, Stanley listened as Mr. Sir told Twitch the requirements for his hole. As wide and as deep as your shovel. Twitch fidgeted. His fingers drummed across the wooden shaft of his shovel, and his neck moved from side to side. You won't be twitching so much after digging all day, Mr. Sir told him. You won't have the strength to wiggle your pinky. He popped some sunflower seeds in his mouth, deftly chewed them, and spat out the shells. This isn't a Girl Scout camp. So sexist whenever he says that. But also... Man, Stanley, it's not that Stanley has trouble figuring out what the right thing to do is. He knows what the right thing to do is, right? He knew that the right thing to do was just to teach Zero how to read. He knew that the right thing, or he knows right now that the right thing to do is to go and try and find his friend and give him water and rescue him. He has trouble kind of being brave enough to do the right thing. Okay. The water truck came shortly after sunrise. Stanley got in line behind Magnet ahead of Twitch. What if it's not too late? He watched Mr. Sir fill Xxxii's canteen. The image of Zero crawling across the hot, dry dirt remained in his head. But what could he do about it? Even if Zero was somehow alive after more than 4 days, how would Stanley ever find him? It would take days. He'd need a car or a pickup truck with a tank of water in the back. Stanley wondered if Mr. Sir had left the keys in the ignition. He slowly backed away from the line and then circled over to the side of the truck. He looked through the window. The keys were there, dangling in the ignition. Stanley felt his fingers start to twitch. He took a deep breath to steady himself and tried to think clearly. He'd never driven before. But how hard could it be? This is really crazy, he told himself. Whatever he did, he knew he'd have to do it quickly before Mr. Sir noticed. It's too late, he told himself. Zero couldn't have survived. But what if it wasn't too late? He took another deep breath. Think about this, he told himself, but there wasn't time to think. He flung open the door to the truck and climbed quickly inside. Hey, shouted Mr. Sir. He turned the key and stepped on the gas pedal. The engine revved, but the truck didn't move. He pressed the pedal to the floor. The engine roared, but the truck was motionless. Mr. Sir came running around the side of the truck. The door was still open. Put it in gear, shouted Twitch. The gear shift was on the floor next to the seat. Stanley pulled the lever back until the arrow pointed to the letter D for drive. The truck lurched forward. Forward. Stanley jerked back against the seat and tightly gripped the wheel as the truck accelerated. His foot pressed to the floor. The truck went faster and faster across the dry lake bed and bounced over a pile of dirt. Suddenly, Stanley was slammed forward, then instantly backward as an airbag exploded in his face. He fell out of the open door and onto the ground. He'd driven right into a hole. He lay on the dirt staring at the truck, which stuck lopsided into the ground. He sighed. He couldn't blame his no-good, dirty, rotten, pig-stealing great-great-grandfather this time. This time, it was his own fault, 100%. He'd probably just done the stupidest thing he'd ever done in his short and miserable life. He managed to get his feet. He was sore, but didn't think he had any broken bones. He glanced back at Mr. Sir, who remained where he was, staring at Stanley. He ran. His canteen was strapped around his neck. It banged against his chest as he ran, and every time it hit him, it reminded him that it was empty, empty, empty. Chapter 33, page 149. He slowed to a walk. As far as he could tell, nobody was chasing him. He could hear voices coming from back by the truck, but he couldn't make out the words. Occasionally, he'd hear the revving of the engine. The truck wasn't going anywhere anytime soon. He headed in what he thought was the direction of Big Thumb. He couldn't see it through the haze. Walking helped calm him down and allowed him to think clearly. He doubted he could make it to Big Thumb with no water in his canteen. He didn't want to risk his life on the hope that he'd find refuge there. He'd have to return to camp. He knew that. But he was in no hurry. It would be better to return later after everyone had had a chance to calm down. And as long as he'd come this far, he might as well look for Zero. He decided he would walk as long as he could until he was too weak to go any farther. Then he'd turn around and go back. He smiled as he realized that wouldn't work. He would only go halfway as far as he thought that he could go, so that he'd still have the strength to return. Then he'd have to make a deal with the warden, tell her where he found Kate Barlow's lipstick tube, and beg for mercy. He was surprised by how far out the holes extended. He couldn't even see the camp compound anymore, but he still kept passing holes. Just when he thought he'd passed the last hole, he'd come across another cluster of them a little farther away. Back at the compound, they had dug in systematic order, row upon row, allowing space for the water truck. But out here, there was no system. It was as if every once in a while, in a fit of frustration, the warden would just pick a spot at random and say, "What the hell? Dig here." It was like trying to guess the winning numbers in a lottery. Stanley found himself looking down into each hole he passed. He didn't admit to himself what he was looking for. After more than an hour had gone by, he thought he had surely seen the last hole, but then off to the left, he saw another cluster of them. He didn't actually see the holes. He saw the mounds of dirt that surrounded them. He stepped over the mounds and looked into the first hole. His heart stopped. Down at the bottom was a family of yellow spotted lizards. Their large red eyes looked up at him. He leaped back over the mound and ran. He didn't know if they were chasing him. He thought he might have seen one leap out of the hole. He ran until he couldn't run any farther, then collapsed. They hadn't run after him. He sat there a while and caught his breath. As he got back to his feet, he thought he noticed something on the ground, maybe 50 yards away. It didn't look like much, maybe just a big rock, but in a land of nothingness, any little thing seemed unusual. He walked slowly toward it. The encounter with the lizards had made him very cautious. It turned out to be an empty sack of sunflower seeds. He wondered if it was the same one Magnet had stolen from Mr. Sir, although that didn't seem likely. He turned it inside out and found one seed stuck to the burlap. Lunch. Okay, that is the end of chapter 33. So tomorrow we'll do chapter 34. And then I think next week we'll read more holes, but I think next week we need a day out in the garden because stuff is going crazy out there. I planted the tiny pumpkins. I did not realize how many of them there would be. They're like the size of a marble right now, but next week I want to show you. Okay, guys, so be good and eat your fruits and vegetables. And if one of your friends wanders out in the desert with no food and no water, then you need to help them or you need to tell an adult who can help them. All right, bye, guys.